welcome Mary Ann to the podium here, and we'll get this started. Thank you.
Thank you, Chet. Thank you for that warm welcome. I certainly want to thank my panelists and my good friend Ken LaValle for having us here this morning. You know, Enterprise Bank has really been a partner with us. As many of you know, and as I say often, one of the best things about being the district attorney in Middlesex County is the amount of things we are able to accomplish because of our partnerships. Everyone knows that state-funded offices can never do everything that needs to be done to protect folks. They can't have the reach that's really needed. But in Middlesex, I'm incredibly fortunate, first of all, to have partnerships with our law enforcement agencies, particularly our local police departments and chiefs. I know Chief Spinney's here from Chelmsford this morning. And, you know, I always ask people to reflect. We all get into the habit of thinking, well, this doesn't work, and it all, you know, people aren't paying enough attention to things. But when we do these programs, just think about the fact that nothing has happened yet. We are here purely in a preventive mode. And chiefs are busy people. They have a very full plate every single day. And I never ask a chief to be somewhere that they don't put aside what they're doing and come out. And that is real dedication to the community in terms of wanting to not have something happen. And the same has been true with our private partners. Much of what we have been able to accomplish over the last few years has been through the commitment and generosity of our private partners. And Enterprise Bank has certainly been at the forefront of that. This is probably the 8th or 10th program that we've put together with Enterprise, all with the goal of keeping people safe. You know, and the bank is doing its business, and that's pretty separate from lots of other things, but it's really their dedication and commitment to their customers and wanting to be sure that you don't fall prey to some of the things we're going to talk about today that inspires these programs. So I'm very grateful for that help, and I'm grateful to all of you for coming out this morning to talk about this. I'm going to spend some time really talking about two separate kinds of things that can part you from your money and your property. The first is what everybody hears a lot about and likes to think about, the sort of scams, the somewhat random, although we're going to talk about how they're not quite that random, events that happen. And then I'm going to spend some time talking about what is the harder conversation, but what is also the source of much of the loss that we see across Middlesex County, and that is the family or close friend transactions that go badly awry. And so just to give you a little bit of background of how I came to this, I've spent over 30 years as a district attorney in Middlesex. And for about 18 of those years, I was the chief of our elder and disabled unit, looking at crimes that were directed at folks who either because of their age, and I don't want to scare anyone, but in Massachusetts, the age of being an elder or a senior citizen is 60 for legal purposes, and people who suffered from some kind of physical or mental disability. And you would continue to see patterns of crimes, see the incredible loss. Because one of the things I really want to stress is, even when, and why prevention is so important, even when we are able to successfully investigate one of these incidents, even when we can prosecute the perpetrator, when that prosecution goes flawlessly and someone is convicted of having taken what they are alleged to have taken, and they receive a sentence that is fair and appropriate for what they did, our ability to recoup the money in the property is very small. Because usually by the time we get to that point, they stole the money in the property because they wanted it and needed it, and it's gone. So one of the heartbreaking things about these cases is that you often see folks who have lived all of their life planning for the future, planning for their own or their family's retirement, and then end up living a very different kind of life because they've lost an enormous amount of their resources. That's why the prevention piece is so important, because it is unlikely that any prosecution is ever really going to put you back in the position that you were in financially in terms of what you've lost. So I want to start by talking about these scams, the sort of stranger scams. But one thing I want you to think about while I'm talking about this is that the bad guys, the scammers, this is their profession. And they are like everyone in this room in a couple of respects. All of us want to do whatever it is that we either did for work or the volunteer work that we do or the family efforts that we do. You want to do it well. You want to be good at it. You want to do a good job for the people you work for. You want to run your own business well. If you're taking care of your grandchildren, you want to do that well. If you're making something, you want it to come out well. Well, scammers have the same goal. They want to do what they do well. What they do well is separate you from your property. And they also, in the same vein, most of us, certainly in our work life and really in our community interactions, want to be able to do what we do, be sort of left to ourselves, fly below the radar, and get accomplished what we want to do. That is what bad guys want to do as well. They want to do things as quietly as possible, get as much return as possible, and not attract the attention of law enforcement. That's their goal. So one of the biggest things to think about in terms of prevention is that often protecting yourself and your resources is as simple as taking a breath and giving yourself a little bit of time. Because if I'm a scammer, my goal is to collect as much in resources as quickly as possible. If you slow me down, you ask too many questions, you want me to write you a letter, you say you're going to call and check, they don't really care about you. They're going to move on because you're not a productive target for them. And they're going to move on to the next person. So often just that taking a second or saying, you know, why don't you call me back tomorrow? Because every one of these scams I'm going to talk about is always accompanied by a time pressure. If you don't take it today, it will be gone. This rate will only be available until 5 o'clock tomorrow. And like all of us, you get a little caught up in that, and you feel like, oh, I don't want to miss out on this deal. I better do something. So that's one piece. The other piece is that, you know, one of the scams that we continue to see that has clearly risen, and it comes in two forms. I think it's one of the worst scams because it really preys on people's emotions, is the grandparent scam. So lots of you have probably heard of that. It takes two forms, really. The first one is you get a phone call, and the person on the other end tells you that they know where your grandchild, and it's usually a relatively young grandchild, is or is going to be that day. And something bad is going to happen if you don't come up with a certain amount of money and take it to a certain place. So they know that your granddaughter's going to play softball at 5 o'clock this afternoon at a certain field. If you can't get $5,000 to a certain place by 3 o'clock, something bad might happen. And the other one, which is actually a little bit more persuasive, in which we have continued to see people giving up lots and lots of money. You might have seen we just charged somebody up here in the Merrimack Valley area. A gentleman lost $84,000. A lot of money to this scam just recently. And the scam goes like this. You get a phone call, and the person says, my name is Marion Ryan. I'm a lawyer. I'm out in Colorado. And your grandson, Michael, who's at the University of Colorado, was arrested last night for driving under the influence. And he said, please don't call Mom and Dad. I need bail money, but they will kill me. I don't want them to know about it. Please call Nana or Grandpa, and they will produce the bail money. And so the grandparents come up with that money. They send off that first $1,500 or whatever it is. And sometimes the call is accompanied by, let me give you the details. Let you speak to Sergeant LaValle. And they hand the phone over to someone who gets on the phone and identifies themselves as the Colorado police officer, tells you about what happened. And it's the kind of thing that is unpleasant to hear, but it's not beyond the pale of something that could have happened. And sometimes you also get the person on the phone who appears to be your grandson, who's choking back sobs, telling you about how this happened. They went to a party last night, they had a little bit to drink, and then they were asked to drive somebody home. And they're very sorry, and they know their mom and dad are going to be angry, and please, could you just send the money? So you send the money. A few hours later, you get another call that says, thank you for sending that money, but because Michael is from Massachusetts, the judge wants some additional money sent. And you send some more money. And the next phone call is, well, we've got Michael all set with bail now, but we're going to need to hire some experts for his trial. So now you're sending a little bit more money. And all of a sudden, you're pretty far down the road. And I was talking about this a few weeks ago at a presentation just like this, and as I was talking, I could see a woman at one of the tables getting more and more agitated as I went through. And at some point, she raised her hand and said, "I'm embarrassed to admit this. My husband and I are very financially sophisticated. We own a business. We have managed a fair amount of money. But over the past month, we sent $114,000. So, part of what is important to think about, too, is the reaction that you all have. So I tell you that story, and I'm sure lots of you are sitting here thinking, well, that's just silly. I would never go and get that much money and send it off, except that every single week people do. And the biggest piece that causes that is these scams flourish in secret. Because if you were sitting here and you got that call on your cell phone, you'd probably say to 3 people at the table, "I just got this call." And people would say to you, "That's foolishness," or "You should call the police," or "You shouldn't send the money." But they call you when you're home. And often you're by yourself, you're focused on the person that you love, who seems to be at the heart of this trouble. And before you know it, you're kind of going down the road of giving the money. And what tends to happen is, at some level, I think people pretty quickly realize by the second call or third call maybe, this probably isn't true. But now you've given a lot of money, you're embarrassed, you probably don't want to call your kids and say, "I just gave up that money." So you're sort of sending good money after bad at that point, because it's probably not true, but you don't want to have things start unraveling. And I want to just talk, and this is true in general for a lot of the scams. What is it that makes that scam so successful? Because we probably get 2 or 3 reports of that every single week, that people have sent the money, right? It seems silly. And I have been traveling all over the county talking about it, so it seems almost impossible to me that people haven't heard about it. But what is it that makes it work so well? And I'd suggest to you it's a couple of things. The first is, if you got that phone call and you didn't have a grandson named Michael who went to the University of Colorado, you would have hung up. Because when they said Michael got arrested, you would have thought, "I only have granddaughters. I don't know who Michael is." You would have hung up, right? So there's that grain of truth that hooks you in. So there's that piece. The second piece is that we spend a lot of time telling people, and I certainly hope that's part of the message you'll take from here, is that if you get those phone calls, even if you don't succumb and send some money, report that to someone. Because what we do is we let the police departments know, we let the Council on Aging know, we let the Senior Center know. The local papers are great about putting out a notice that those calls are going around. So we try to let everybody know that those calls are out there. And so that when they get it, they will say, "Oh, I read about this, this is a scam," and they will hang up. But here's the interesting piece. I spent about 20 years looking at these cases, thinking about what the connections were, because we'd always see them in clusters. And they appear to be somewhat random. But in all the reports we have gotten from these calls, whether people sent the money and lost the money, or they got the call and they'd heard people talking about it, were smart enough not to send the money, never, and see what you think the odds of this are, never in almost 20 years did I have a person tell us they got that call who did not have the financial ability to put together some money. We all know some people who, if their entire life depended on it this afternoon, could not put together $500 in cash. They just lack those resources, right? If they had to have $500 in cash, they couldn't raise it. Never in almost 20 years has one of those people told me they got the call, right? So that's one piece. And if you think about it, then they're not really random. And the fact that they hook you in with the true information, they have some source of that, right? So keep in mind what I told you about the bad guy, wanting to be good at it. And I spent a lot of time trying to connect the dots from people. You know, did they all go to the same hairdresser? Did they all buy their house from the same broker? Did they all bank at Enterprise Bank? Like, what was the common denominator? Not that that would ever be the case. Just checking to see if we're awake. I will tell you what I think, and this is just a theory, but it's a pretty good theory, is a common denominator. And it will, part of what you'll see, I hope, from that will help you with all of these other scams. Because there are lots of scams, you know, the IRS scam, the lottery scam, they're all kind of the same, and they're all predicated on a couple of these things. My theory is that in some way, these scams are fueled by people who are connected with medical facilities. Right? Now, think about why that would be. Because if you go to a doctor or a hospital, a clinic, whatever, and I happen to work there, and I'm either the bad guy, bad woman, or the significant other of the bad guy, when you come in for your appointment, what's one of the first things I know? I know your address. So maybe I live in Chelmsford, and I know that Crooked Spring Road is just a lovely place. People who live on Crooked Spring Road probably have resources, right? So there's a start. If I don't know the town, I go on Google Earth, and I look at your house, right? And if you haven't Google Earthed your own house, do it and you'll be horrified, all right? Because Google Earth is so good now. Not only do you see your house, but you can see the vehicles in the driveway of your house. So if I Google Earth your house and I see a beautiful 4-bedroom brick house, impeccably maintained and landscaped, 2 lovely new SUVs in the driveway, I have a pretty good sense that you can put some money together. All right, so I got that piece. I also know, from looking at your chart, what you do or did for a living. Gives me a sense, right? You're a surgeon. You are a banker. You are somebody. I can give a pretty good sense about what your income might be. I also know what your insurance is. So I know if you have Medicare and a very expensive private supplement, or you have just Medicare, right? So now I can get a little bit of a picture about your financial background. So I've got that piece. So I can weed out pretty fast. Not 100% accurate, but it's going to be pretty good. The people, those folks we know who can't put the $500 together. Then think about how much you chat with those people, right? And I'm going to give you an experiment, and once you do this experiment, you won't speak to anybody in public again, I promise. I really feel like I'm reducing the civility across Middlesex County. So you go to the doctor's, and you finish with the doctor, and the doctor wants to see you in 3 weeks. So you walk out to the nice woman who works behind the counter, and you say, "Doctor wants to see me in 3 weeks." And she says, "Okay, how about December 1st?" And you say, "No, no, no." You're looking at your calendar, and "No, I can't be here on December 1st because, you know, my grandson, Michael, he's coming home from college on the 1st, and we'll be picking him up, and my daughter, Becky, and I will be driving down to Virginia to meet the rest of the family." Well, all of you now know. All right? And to tell you what a personal failure I am at this, my 87-year-old father had 12 grandchildren, incredibly proud of all of his grandchildren, very involved in their lives. If you sat beside him at the doctor for 15 minutes, I promise you, you would know all of their names, you would know where they went to school, and you would know what sport they played. And he would have told you that in his Irish whisper, so those of you in the back would be completely conversant with that. All right? So the next time you are at a doctor's, or you're in the lobby at the Leahy or Lowell General, walk around and pretend you're a bad guy and mine for information. You will leave there with bucket loads of information because people are sitting chatting. I hope I get this appointment over with. You know, my granddaughter Elizabeth's in a play this afternoon. I need to get home. And she's at the Kennedy Middle School. Now I'm giving that out to everybody. right? And that's why these scams work. You know, after someone got scammed and we would talk to them about things that might have happened in the weeks leading up to it that were a little bit suspicious. One of the popular things was someone would remember they got a phone call. Hi, this is Marion Ryan. I went to high school in town with your son. I was hoping to reach, oh, you mean Bobby? Yes, I was hoping to reach Bobby for it's our reunion. I was hoping to get him and invite him. Oh, well, Bobby's done very well. You know, he doesn't live here anymore. He's married. He has 3 kids. They live in Winchester. You've given out all that information. When somebody would remember that call, and they would then be scammed, and we would circle back to Bobby, Bobby never got a follow-up call. It wasn't his reunion year. No one ever talked to him about any of those things. But very innocently, all that information got given up. And we're going to talk a little bit this morning about, you know, protecting things like your Social Security number, your bank accounts, all of those. I'm sure Prima will talk a little bit about what the bank will and won't ask you to give over the telephone, that sort of thing. That's incredibly important. But I think one thing we have to keep in mind, and particularly in light of some of the breaches that have happened lately, is your personal information is a lot more than that. Your personal information is all of those things. It's your family members, it's your insurance, it's things about your address, your schedule. You know, the chief knows as well as I do, we have lots of folks who come in all the time, and their house has been broken into while they were on vacation. Did anyone know you were going on vacation? Nope, didn't tell anybody. Never told anybody. I click on Facebook, and I have no computer prowess. There are 87 pictures off to Aruba for 10 days. Well, the bad guys are looking at Facebook, too. You know, when Michael got into the University of Colorado, and he had the sweatshirt, and he said, Nana, I'm so happy I'm in, literally a 7th grader can geotag those photos and figure out who they went to and who Nana is. So nothing good is being posted out there. And we really need to be more careful about your privacy settings, about what you're putting out there, your schedule, how much you're telling people about that. Because that is really what is the heart of most of these scams. That's how people get focused on you. And the other very unfortunate thing is, once you get identified among the bad guys as somebody who gives up money, you become the target very often. We frequently see people who it seems almost unbelievable. They got hit with the lottery scam, they got hit with the grandparent scam, they got hit with a contractor's scam. That's because their name's going around as somebody who is a little bit gullible and that you can get to give up some money. And to that point, and the last thing I'll talk about in this section, because the question that people always ask me is, do I know how to stop those phone calls that you get looking for things? If I did, I would not be at the DA's office. I would be a very rich woman selling that piece of information. So I don't know that, but here is the other scam and the piece that makes your information more valuable. You know, businesses buy lists of telephone numbers to make those calls, whether they're robocalls or real calls. When they buy a list of numbers, they don't actually know whether the numbers on that list are good numbers. So they sell relatively cheaply, and I'm just making this price up. But say those numbers all sell for 5 cents a piece. If a number is confirmed to be a good number, it is more valuable. So a number where there's actually a person who will answer the phone might be worth 25 cents. So when you get a call from a number that you don't recognize, and you pick that phone up, and you hear, you know, this is Smith's chimney sweep, and you're not interested, the very fact of having spoken on that phone has made your number go up in value. So if you are somebody who always answers the phone, your calls are going to increase because your number is now a 25-cent number. It's something people want. Because even if your answering machine clicks on and says, this is the Smiths and we're not here, they don't really know if anybody actually lives there or somebody's gone off to a long-term care facility. They don't know if it's a good number. So the best thing you can do is just not answer your phone. You see a number you don't realize, and particularly the latest scam is you see a number that looks like your own number. all right? They're scamming them, so you think it's somebody in town, you think it's your kid's school, you think it's a number that you almost kind of recognize. It's a spoof, and they're tricking you. They trick you. A lot of times you will see your own phone number come up on your phone. And you're thinking, did I throw it in my purse and it rang? Well, how did that happen? It is a total spoof. They're able to electronically turn that number around and make it call you. So you will answer. And often now, the other scam is you will say yes to some question while you're on the phone. They'll ask you a question. The easiest question is, can you hear me? You instinctively say yes. They then use the recording of your yes to be the way you allegedly buy other things. And you'll start seeing a bill on your credit card for like $12.99 every month. When you dispute it, they will say, you said you wanted it, and you'll hear your own voice replayed. So that's the other piece. I want to spend just a couple more minutes talking about the other piece, because pretty much what I said about those scams applies to all of them, about being careful. But the other piece, and the piece that people find harder to talk about is, while there's certainly a lot of money that gets lost to those scams, the vast majority of money that people lose goes to members of their family or friends or caregivers that they let have access to some of their things. And that happens primarily a couple of ways. The first one of which is, and it is an old relic in Massachusetts, are joint bank accounts. So people have a joint bank account with somebody else in their family, their daughter, their niece, whoever it is. And again, I'm a failure in this area because I have 11 Irish aunts. They all have a bank account with my name on them. And not a good idea. And the idea is obviously if something happened that somebody would be able to get to your money to pay a medical bill, to pay for a funeral home, to pay for whatever. People fail to realize that that money, regardless of who put it in there, legally belongs to both of the people on that account. So you have a joint account with your niece. Your niece has never put a penny into that account. She legally owns every dollar in that account. What that means is, if she takes it all out, I cannot prosecute her. The police cannot charge her because you can't steal what is yours. The other piece is people think that just in a regular joint account, you have some obligation to use that money for my benefit. I think that if I put my niece on the account, I've talked to her, she's agreed, she will always take care of me with that money. That's very nice. It's not at all enforceable. So if she decides to use that money to buy herself a new car, nothing we can do about that. So one of the problems with that is, and it's a heartbreaking problem, because when you pick that person to be on your account, they are somebody that you love and trust. And usually what happens is life has changed. You put them on that account 8 years ago. In the meantime, they've lost a job. Their marriage has come apart. They have a child who has a substance issue, something. The scenario is always the same. I was behind this month on fill in the blank, my mortgage, my car payment, whatever. Auntie wouldn't mind if just this one time I covered the bill. Never in 30 years have I seen $1 go back in, because they took the first month, they're running behind, and next month they're a little short, and next month they're a little short, and the money gets depleted. Or the colder explanation is, at some point that money might all end up going to a nursing home. I'm going to spend it now. People come into the police station and tell us that's what happened. So that is something to be incredibly careful about. There are other kinds of accounts that do protect you. The other thing is, if you want to have that kind of account, put in there what you could afford to lose. So a lot of people go to Florida for the winter. They leave a joint account to get the bills paid at the house in Chelmsford. If the bills are going to be $3,000, have an account where you leave $5,000. If you lose the $5,000, it won't be good, but it's better than you lose everything that you have. The other way that people get trapped into the losing funds is the powers of attorney. And a power of attorney, if you remember, kind of grew out of the whole healthcare proxy that we started signing at the hospitals, and they started including a power of attorney. When you sign that power of attorney, and I'm sure Martha will talk a little bit more about this, but You legally, you make somebody else you. So anything you can do, sell something, rent it, mortgage it, anything you can do, that person, without your permission, can do. So a frequent scenario now is we have somebody who bought their house in 1981. They've long since paid off their mortgage. They start getting mortgage bills, and they think, well, this is silly, a mistake at the bank. They go to the bank, and they discover that their son put a mortgage on the house because he's the power of attorney. We can do a lot of things. You can sue. You can do a lot of things, but that mortgage is going to have to get paid off. So that's a way that people expose themselves without really understanding what they're doing. And it is one area where you really do get what you pay for. If you want to have a power of attorney, and they certainly have a purpose or a healthcare proxy, then you need to figure out what you really want that person to do. I want them to only have it the first 2 weeks in December while I'm in the hospital. I want them to have it, but I don't want them to touch more than $1,000. And then go to a professional, talk that through, and have them create the documents for you that reflect that. So you aren't leaving everything you have. Again, it's protecting your personal information. You aren't leaving every 401k, every bank account vulnerable to somebody getting to that. So those are a little bit about ways that people really lose money. We're going to spend some time talking about particularities at the bank. Martha will talk about some of the protections that are out there. And I know I've covered a lot of information in a short time, but I hope that's giving you a sense, made you nervous, which is a good thing, to think a little bit about your own planning and think a little bit particularly about that sharing information. So I'm going to turn it back over now to Ken, who's going to lead off our panel. Thank you again for having us.
Thank you, Martha. That was very informative. My name is Ken LaValle. I work at Enterprise Bank. I've been at the bank now for 4.5 years after I retired from the Lowell Police Department, having spent about a 30-year career in law enforcement. And Martha had mentioned that, Marion had mentioned that the Chelmsford Police is here. Of course, Chief Spinney, but in addition to the Chelmsford Police, we have the Lowell Police Department and the Tewksbury Police Department as well. And of course, we have dozens of Enterprise Bank bankers here, and I think they're here because they understand and appreciate and realize how important it is to safeguard our customers. They take this very seriously, and I know every one of them in this room always considers the fact that our customers are potential victims and are always looking to protect them from any type of victimization. And last but not least, I want to thank our friends at Lowell Telecommunications who are taping this today. This will be shown on LTC at a later date. So some of you may be on TV, and you may have an opportunity to see yourselves later on when this is shown on LTC in Lowell and maybe even in some other communities. So what I'd like to do now is have a panel discussion. We're going to ask each of the representatives to speak for a few minutes, and then when they're done speaking, we're going to open this up to a Q&A, and you'll be able to ask any questions you may have to our distinguished panel. So let me begin with Martha Howe, an attorney practicing in Lowell. She is formerly a Lawyer of the Year, 2014, the Lowell Bar Association, so that's quite an accomplishment. And Martha, I just want, from your perspective, maybe some understanding about what you're seeing in your practice when it comes to this type of issue, particularly when elderly are being victimized.
Thank you, Ken. First of all, I'd like to thank Enterprise Bank for holding this seminar, and also thank you, Mary and Ryan, for your great speech. My name is Martha Howe. For 20 years, I worked with my late father, Richard Howe, and we focused primarily on civil litigation. And an incident in April of 2006 changed the trajectory of my career, and it had to do with elder financial abuse. The reason why this seminar is so important, and the reason why I have such high respect for Enterprise Bank, is because banks are many times the last line of defense that an elder has. The elderly are only 13% of the population, but they have over a third of the wealth, and criminals follow the wealth. Following up on DA Ryan's speech, her focus on scam artists was excellent, because I know some elders in my own family that could be susceptible to those. I'd like to talk about 3 types of abusers that we see in our practice. By we, I mean I've work with my niece Ariel Howe right now. She's unable to be here. The three types of abusers that we see mainly are family members. The first one is a family member. It's usually a person who is unemployed, down on their luck, maybe the black sheep of the family. They've got a substance abuse problem, always relied on mom and dad. Maybe they're still living in the family home. We call them evil brother, evil sister, evil daughter. Evil daughter has the potential to really abuse financially their parents, their siblings. The other type of abuser we see, and the second most prominent, are caretakers. Caretakers it's such a risk for the elder because the elder is very vulnerable and the caretaker can use undue influence. So back in April 2006, I got a call from a neighbor of an elder. And the neighbor said, the caretaker of my neighbor won't let us in the house. And I said, how old is the neighbor? The neighbor was 93. So I had previously represented the elder. So my father and I got in the car, drove across town, and got to the house. The caretaker was there. The caretaker was 75 years old, and the elder was 93. We not forced our way, we made our way into the house. The elder was lying in her bed, naked, rings of urine around her mattress, screaming, "Help me, help me." My father turned to the caretaker and said, "What the hell is going on here?" The caretaker leaned over to the elder and she said the two most feared words in the English language to any elderly person. "They're going to take you to a nursing home." The elder screamed, "Help me." I had never really done elder law until that date. That night I went home, I typed an affidavit, I went into the probate court the next day, and I got an emergency guardianship because the elder, she had two nephews on the West Coast. I got the emergency guardianship. I had the Lowell Police Department there the next afternoon by 3 p.m. They forcibly removed the caretaker. I had a nurse and a CNA. The elder had 3 days to live. They nursed her back. She had $1 million in her will that she was leaving to the caretaker. And the caretaker knew this. The caretaker was intentionally starving her to death. Nothing ever happened to that caretaker. And it's not, DA Ryan, this is before your time. But the elder ended up living another 3 years. She did another will, left everything to her nephews, and the caretaker ended up suing me for visitation. We won that case. In fact, I have another case where another family contacted me. The same caretaker is preying on that elder. The third type of abuser we see in our practice is what we call the 11th hour friend to the elder. The elder can go through their entire life, and then in the twilight of their lives, some person, a cousin, a neighbor, will come in and suddenly be the best friend of that elder. And it's never an elder with $500 in the bank account. It's always a wealthy elder. That's a red flag. We see three patterns of abuse in our office. The number one abuse is ATM debit cards. You don't have to be on a joint account to get the elder's ATM debit card. We had a granddaughter get her grandmother's debit card, and she spent thousands of dollars on fast food, liquor stores, flowers, pet care, to the tune of at least $60,000 before elder services came in. We currently have a case where a tenant got the bank card for his elderly landlord, and I took his deposition this past Tuesday, and he took $5,000 in 41 different increments through the ATM, and he actually said under oath, "Oh, the elder needed that money," and I went and got it for her, and she knew everything, and she approved it. That was his defense. We had another case where I had a client that had $300,000 in the bank, And when he died, we probated his estate. There was $15,000 left. His grandson, who had a substance abuse problem, had his ATM card. So banks, seeing this type of transaction, when they know the elder is homebound, not getting out, they're not going to bank machines all over the place. Huge red flag for banks to stop this elder abuse. The other pattern of abuse, and probably the most dangerous, Mary and Ryan focused on it, was the power of attorney. I have a power of attorney right here that I am leaving after this, and I'm going to Deauville, because a client's son called and said, my mother's in Deauville, and she needs a power of attorney. And I said, my first question was, do all the other siblings know about this, and are they assenting? Yes. The second and most important is, has the healthcare proxy been invoked by the physician? By that, I mean, has this person's doctor stated that they do not have the capacity to make healthcare decisions? And the client's son said, it has not been invoked. And I said, okay, I'll go to the nursing home, I'm gonna ask if it's been invoked, because if it's been invoked, I'm not going to notarize a power of attorney. Now, that's just my practice. We had a case where an elder at Deauville was 90 years old, had an estate plan in place for decades, and she had dementia, advanced dementia. Evil daughter hired a mobile notary public. She paid him $150. He was a realtor. He went up to Deauville, spent 2 minutes with the elder, notarized the power of attorney, and undid decades of estate plan, leaving everything to evil daughter, causing lawsuits, money, financial exploitation. Joint accounts, again, are a great source of abuse. And what we say to people is, if you're going to be a power of attorney, you don't go on that account jointly. You're only on as power of attorney. A power of attorney is only authorized to act. They're not authorized to own. But the power of attorney is the most important estate planning document that you can have, and it's also the riskiest, because you've got to make sure that the person you have has your back and is not going to be stealing from you. The last resort that we have for clients is going to court. We file for conservatorships all the time. If there's a dispute in the family, if there's money missing, if the elder has already declined and they're unable to sign a power of attorney, we go to court. It's the last resort, it's not the best resort, and it's very expensive, but it's really important that the courts are there for two reasons. When the court gets involved, the conservator has to sign a bond, and if that conservator takes a dime, they're personally liable on that bond. The second reason is the conservator has to account for every penny to the court. A guardian ad litem will be appointed to review the conservator's documents and expenditures. So again, going to court is expensive, it's a last resort, and the number one goal is to protect the elder. So those are the types of abuse that we see, and I really want to thank Enterprise Bank for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Martha. So, I'm going to introduce my partner at Enterprise Bank, Prima Nagathan. We work in the security department together. And Prima and I, almost every day, receive reports of scams and frauds and other criminal activities that we investigate or involved in, sometimes not necessarily involving our bank, but other banks as well. And we attend a monthly meeting with bank security professionals and law enforcement. And at a recent meeting, the Secret Service reported to us that these violent street gangs that you would normally see involved in drug trafficking and firearms violations, are now gravitating to these types of crimes, these fraudulent activities, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's extremely lucrative. They make a lot of money scamming money out of people. Number two, they're less likely to be caught. These crimes are so difficult to actually apprehend the perpetrator, and these criminals know that. And number three, it's much less dangerous than working the street dealing drugs and guns. So they're actually now moving into this type of criminal activity, And that's why we're seeing such an expansion of these particular crimes. So Prima, from the bank's perspective and what we're seeing internally, could you just explain to the audience those types of issues?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ken. Good morning, everybody. My name is Prema Nagathan. I'm the security officer at Enterprise Bank. And I'm going to focus in the next few minutes about some safe banking practices, which most of your financial institutions will offer to you at no cost. It's really just spending the time to protect your information. Because we've heard from District Attorney Marianne Ryan about the variety of scams that are out there. Martha, how you talked about how people are being victimized, whether it's by a known family member or a scammer on the phone or at your doorstep. But there are some easy things that we can do, and the big goal, really, I'm hoping today, is to remove the stigma of being able to say I was a victim of a fraud. It's okay, because whether it's law enforcement, whether it's bank professionals, whether it's the district attorney's office or your attorney, we are seeing this happen every single day. So we are not going to judge a person to say, well, how did you fall victim for the scam? That's not going to happen, because we are going to jump into an action mode to try and protect your funds, to protect your information. So on some of the safe banking practices, what you can do is first recognizing information that you believe or we believe is confidential information, that you should be very, very careful before you pass it off to somebody else, whether it's your account number. And hopefully you all bank with Enterprise Bank, because we do care for our customers. But regardless of what financial institution you bank with, you have an account number, you have a debit card, and you may do online banking, which you have online passwords, you have PIN numbers attached to your debit card. Be extremely careful before you give this information to somebody. Even as a financial institution, if I am calling my customer, I will not ask you for your password. I will not ask you for your PIN number under any circumstances. I may call you to verify your social, just so I know I'm talking to my customer that is on the phone. But that's normally one of the ways we have seen customers fall victim with somebody called them on the phone and they said, oh, this is your financial institution calling you. There's a problem with your account. When you hear that, you're concerned. You want to know what's going on, and you want to stop any fraudulent transaction. So without really verifying who the person on the phone is, you may just believe, oh, this is Enterprise Bank calling me. What's going on? And the person will proceed to ask you and say, oh, we see some fraudulent transactions on your account. We need to put a stop on it, but I need your social security number. So more than likely, that's not really your bank calling you. It is the fraudster. It's the scammer that's calling you to steal your information from you. One of the things you can also do, if you are concerned that maybe someone has somehow compromised your banking information, please notify the bank as soon as you can. The sooner we know the controls we can put in place, and maybe we can protect you and your funds from it being stolen, so timing is going to be critical. We had one person, and I'll just give an example. We had an elderly customer who fell victim to a driveway scam. There was an individual at her doorstep, and he said, I'm here to fix your driveway. She had never called. She did not really need any work on her driveway, but he forced himself into getting the customer to convince that, okay, maybe, yeah, that's fine, go ahead and do my driveway. He was not a professional that was really trained to do driveways. He made a big mess, came up to her doorstep and said, yep, the work is done, you owe me $8,000. I'm sure she was thinking that, no, first of all, I don't even need any work, and now I have to pay $8,000. But she was a little bit concerned. She was scared. She didn't know what this person would do if she refused to give him a check. She actually wrote out an $8,000 check and gave it to this individual. But thankfully, as soon as this person left, he was on his way to the closest branch. But she called the bank and she said, I just want you to know, I didn't know what to do. I wrote an $8,000 check, and he might come into cash, but I didn't know, I was scared. So the timing was so perfect, we could actually put an immediate stop on the check. He came into the branch, sure enough, within 10 minutes, there was a police officer waiting for him, and he was arrested. So the timing is going to be critical. It's okay if you didn't know or you were not sure, you gave your information, please notify your local law enforcement and your bank as soon as you can. Martha, you talked about how debit cards are a great way for someone to take advantage of. You don't have to be on an account to have access to a debit card. It's a 4-digit PIN. Maybe, grandma gave it to the granddaughter and said, well, get me $100 because I can't get out today. But of course, the granddaughter then takes a couple extra $100 because it's Friday night and she has plans with her friends. With things like that, if you have given your PIN number, which again, you should not be giving your PIN number even to a family member or anybody else, but if it does happen, again, call the bank and that PIN number can be changed very quickly and very easily. But another thing to consider is limits on debit cards. Normally, you'll have a $1,500 limit, or depending on what your bank offers you, you may want to look at that and say, do I really need a $1,500 limit every day? More than likely not. I might need some money for some groceries and some shopping. So maybe lower the limit so your risk exposure is much lower. So if someone is to go out of town and just go shopping, they're very limited to how much they can really withdraw that day. So that might be something that you may want to consider. A lot of banks will offer things such as direct deposit, whether you're receiving your Social Security or a benefit check, your pension, retirement fund, IRS refunds. A great feature is set up direct deposit so the money comes directly into your account and you can choose when you want to go to the bank or an ATM to withdraw those funds. Because what we have seen quite commonly is whether the check is coming and sitting in your mailbox for you to be picked up at the end of the day, or you are writing checks out to pay your bills, whether it's your doctor's office bills, your electricity bill, your phone bills. A lot of people will write checks out and leave it in the mailbox so the mailman can pick them up. Or your check is coming in the mail and sitting in the mailbox. People driving by can see that there is envelope sticking out through your mailbox, take them, open them up, change the name, and try to transact them through different banks. So that's another feature that you may want to consider is direct deposits, direct bill pays through your accounts, going directly to all the businesses that you do that provide you services. And there are so many other different features that your banks can offer you. Certainly check with your banks to see what they have. Whether you want to send money to your grandkids or your kids for your birthday, there are features such as pop money, and everything is electronic. It's a little bit more secure, faster, and definitely eliminates the paper trail and having a paper check sitting in a mailbox that someone could steal. Some of the communities recently, too, had issues with a organized group going through mailboxes. They're actually trying to fish envelopes out of mailboxes, and I know law enforcement is investigating it very thoroughly, but that's another way people are stealing mail and altering those checks and trying to cash them. Reviewing your statements. Everybody will receive their monthly statements, whether it's in the mail or even electronically. If you do have access to a computer, your bank can set you up with an electronic format versus sending you a paper mail, because then again, you have your statement sitting in your mailbox with your account information, with the transaction information. That's a lot of information. If it gets in the bad hands, could be very valuable to somebody, but could cause a lot of problems to you as a consumer. So reviewing your bank statement, whether it's electronic or paper format, looking at your transactions. We had one customer a few days ago. There was a very, very small dollar amount debit. It was for 5 cents and 7 cents. He initially figured, no big deal. It's such a small, negligible amount. Maybe it's nothing. But within a couple days, there were much bigger transactions coming through on the account. And of course, they were all unauthorized. That small transaction was to just see if it was a valid account and if they are able to tap into it for future fraudulent transactions. So regardless of the amount, if you don't recognize it, call your bank and find out what it is, because if it is an unauthorized, unknown transaction, we may be able to put stops. So there's no further damage on the account. So overall, again, the timing is of the essence. We do see fraud taking place with customers of all ages, male, female, but definitely elder customers do become more of a target to that because they're trusting, they want to help, whether it's charities. We've seen customers fall victims to false charities, especially when you have a disaster or something going on with the storm and maybe trying to help people that were victimized by the hurricane. All of a sudden, you're getting emails, you're getting letters, you're getting phone calls trying to say we're trying to raise funds. And yes, we do want to help people in the community, and there are very good charities that are raising money that we want to donate to. So doing your research before you write out a check or agree to make a payment. And there are resources available to you from the DA's office to your local law enforcement can tell you if a charity is a reputable charity or not, or even calling the bank. A lot of times we can reach out to other counterparts and other banks and find out if there is a concern, what can we do before the damage has happened. I had a customer that I'm working with currently. She has a very limited income. She lives off of her Social Security. She pays her rent, and she has medical bills that she has to pay to take care of her health. She doesn't have access to a computer. She has a flip phone, very, very limited resources. She has a couple of friends. Socially, she's in her apartment that she hangs out with. And a person somehow found a way to text her. And over a period of few months, she had now befriended this individual who she believed was a very good friend of her because she had texted back and forth with this individual. What he had told her was that he was in Nigeria. He was originally from New York, and he was trying to come back. He was in Nigeria for a project for a couple years, and he's almost done, and he wants to come back, meet her, and then bring her to New York to meet his daughter, and then maybe they can have a good life. So she really believed this, and she thought her life was going to be good, and she started to trust this individual. Unfortunately, it was all part of a scam. This individual on the other end of the text obviously took a few months to gain her trust, and then he started to say, well, I'm trying to come back to the United States, and they won't let me board the plane because I don't have some documents for boarding the plane and coming back to the country. So can you help me? Of course, she was eager to meet him, so she was going to go out of her way to help this individual. He told her that, my project manager in the United States will send you a check. You take it to your bank, and you deposit that check, and you withdraw the funds the next day, and then you can send that money, and I'll tell you where to send it. That will get to me eventually, and I'll be able to use those funds to come back to the country and meet you. So she didn't really think this was anything, no red flags went off. She did receive a check as the person had told her. She came to the bank, she deposited the check. The next day she came in, immediately withdrew the funds, and per the instructions, went to Walmart to wire the money out to an individual, not even this particular person, to an individual, so the money was gone. Unfortunately, a couple days later, the bank, we notified her that the check that she deposited was a fraudulent check. So her account was overdrawn a few $1,000s. She was concerned. She didn't know what was going on. So we met with her, and as we started to talk to her, we realized that this individual had done this to her. And then she had realized that she was scammed. So when I talk about timing being of the essence, had she come to us and she had said, I have this check, I'm not really sure, I'm trying to do this, there was probably a very good chance that we could have done something. At this point, she'd already withdrawn the funds, she had already wired the money out, and the money was gone. It was too late. So now she is trying to actually pay the bank back because she said, no, I want to make good. I messed up, but I do want to work with you. At that point, it had been a few months. Things were going okay. Unfortunately, this individual convinced her again that nope, that was a mistake, and so now they're trying to get her back into it. At that point, we did start to work with local law enforcement. Even the FBI now has been a great resource to us because they're starting to realize that elder exploitation has become so predominant these days that they want to go and help members in the community that are falling victim to this types of fraud. So they actually went out to her and met with her, sat down with her, because now we are realizing that she might become a repeat victim to the same fraud. So we definitely want to save her money, protect her, and law enforcement has been a great resource to us. And we're just sitting down and showing her different articles, different news articles that this is happening everywhere. It's not happening to just isolated incidents. So it's out there. We are here as a resource to you. Please call your bank, call us at Enterprise. Even if you're a non-customer, we will try and do what we can to try and help you. So with that, I will turn it back to Ken. And
Thank you, Prima. That was very well done. Thank you. So I'm going to ask Marion to summarize this morning's conversation, but before she does, you hit on something, Prima, that Marion and I spoke about recently, and that is how unscrupulous people, are taking advantage of those who are so concerned about recent tragedies across the United States. The shooting that took place in Las Vegas, the hurricanes we've had, and I know you've had some experience dealing with some of those issues. So if you don't mind talking about that and then summarizing what we've talked about this morning.
So Ken is right. Just in the last few months, we've had a lot of tragedy across the world, whether it's been the hurricane, the Las Vegas shooting, all of those things. And, bad guys take advantage of things. And very quickly, we start seeing those GoFundMe pages go up. We had one right up in this area. We had a family affected in this area by the situation in Las Vegas. All of a sudden, there were all kinds of GoFundMe pages. People are incredibly generous, and they want to be helpful. And they start going on and giving that money, and they really have no idea. I am certain that endless thousands of dollars have been sent off to Puerto Rico, allegedly, that will never make it to Puerto Rico. Because people have just gone on. If you just take a look, if you just scan around on the internet right now, I counted last week 87 places that you could give money online. It is highly unlikely those are all legitimate. So the best rule of thumb for that is really to always make your own donation, to initiate it yourself if you want to give, and give to something that is a real place. You might have seen we began a prosecution a few weeks ago of somebody who was sending charity invitations to donate. And what they were doing was using things that sounded legitimate. So probably everybody in this room knows the Jimmy Fund. We all think the Jimmy Fund is a great thing. This man was sending invitations to donate to the Boston Jimmy Fund. He was the Boston Jimmy Fund. Veterans organizations are a prime source. We all like certain veterans organizations, but you see something, Veterans of All Wars. That's not a real organization. So it's always very close. Police and fire departments, lots of things. This is the local police council. That is a famous one for put checks up on the front door. We'll come by and pick them up. Oh, and we'll look at your house while we're there. So that's the other piece of it. And I just want to go back for 1 second on a couple of things. One that Martha mentioned about, it is true that nursing home is the most dreaded phrase. It is how many abusers manipulate their victims. What's important to know is that Massachusetts is a self-determination state. You have the right to remain in your house unless there is no reasonable way for you to be accommodated. So if there is a reasonable way for you to be accommodated with services in your home, you have that right. So just because my son is abusing me financially and saying, if you don't let me keep doing this, you're going to the nursing home, that's really not true. And a lot of people live in fear because of that. The second piece was the statements. I talked about how people drain down an account. And when that happens, it's often happened over a year or two, and we say, how is it you didn't notice? And folks then say to us, now that I think of it, I haven't seen those statements. It is incredibly easy to go to the post office and divert people's mail. So if I'm the bad granddaughter and I'm working down your account, all I have to do is go have the statement sent to my house now. You're not going to notice that. So you need to have some kind of tickler for yourself of when your statements are coming in, are you checking? And the third is keeping track of, if you get those in paper or you have them on your computer or whatever, when other people are in your home, what is their access to that information? One of the really most tragic house invasion cases I ever prosecuted involved a couple that had had some folks in to do some wallpapering and painting. While they were doing that, one of the rooms they freshened up was the study. In the drawer of the desk, the husband kept meticulous banking records. All of his statements were in there, everything. So 2 coats of paint, pull out the drawer. It takes a second to look, figure out where you bank and what the numbers are. And what your balances are. So, be careful about that. When people are in the house, think of those things as being valuable. Lock a drawer, put them somewhere else, because you are never going to do what you think, that you're going to be with them every minute. You'll go to the bathroom, you'll answer the telephone, and they're taking advantage of that. So I think what you really, today, what we hope you take away from this is, first of all, that prevention is the best thing to be doing with all of this. That you are very fortunate in this area to have incredible partners like the banks, the enterprise, the police departments, so many agencies up in this area that if either you are suspicious of something, private counsel, if you have a question, make that phone call before you do something. If you find out that something has happened, you have actually given some money, just please don't be embarrassed about that. Go stop the flow before you bleed much worse. And unfortunately, while you are able to be out and about, able to know what you want to be doing, now is the time to really be making the plan. Because it's a conversation we don't want to have with our families. We don't want to think about our own mortality. So we often put off making those plans. And then you are in the situation where somebody has become not able to do that. They're not physically able to get out and do that. And you end up in that situation where a guardian or someone is coming in to try to conserve what you have, and also to distribute your assets in a way that might not have been what you ever planned. So this is an area where preparation is really key.
Well, thank you very much. So, I'm sure there are many questions in the audience, so please, anybody.
I'd like to go on a different tack on the financial abuse and physical abuse. We have required reportables, and who are the near required reportables?
So there are a list of mandated reporters. For people that aren't familiar with it, elders in the state are people who suffer from a disability in the same way that children. Most people are familiar with the folks that have to report a suspicion of abuse of children. So there's a whole list of folks. If you're a school teacher and you suspect that a child's being abused, you're required to report to the Department of Children and Families. In the same way, if somebody's over the age of 60 or they suffer from a physical or mental disability, and you are one of that category, and they're mostly professionals, doctors, dentists, podiatrists, nurses, all kinds of folks are covered by that, and you become aware or have a reasonable basis to think that somebody is being abused or exploited, you are required to report that, either to the local elder services agency or in the case of somebody who's disabled, to the Disabled Persons Protection Commission. Those are the folks who can legally be sanctioned for not reporting. Anyone can report. We encourage people to report. As Martha said, it's often, some of the worst cases come to light because of neighbors or other concerned folks, because the people are really trapped in their house, so they're not coming in contact with a lot of the mandated reporters. They're not going to the doctor. They're not going to the hospital. So it is the neighbor who says, something's not right over there. I need to call. The question people always have is, what's my liability if I do that? So long as you report in good faith what you see or what you suspect, you cannot successfully be sued for that. Will somebody try to threaten you? Will they maybe file a lawsuit against you? Yes. But so long as you did it in good faith, maybe it turns out you're wrong. Maybe everything is actually fine, or the elder is really better than we think and they have consented to it. Just because you're older, you don't lose the right to make bad decisions. So maybe I'm 80 and my granddaughter is taking every penny, but she's my only granddaughter and I really don't care. I have a right to make that decision. If that's what it turns out in the investigation, you are still protected from that. So the answer to that question is, who else is out there? Really, it is, we are a society, we are a community. We should take care of each other. If you suspect something, I always say to people, think about, would you want your own parents or would you want to be in that situation? Make that phone call and report it to somebody.
So let's take it on the financial side. Bankers are not required to do a reporting?
No.
Lawyers, accountants?
lawyers we have our own ethical obligations of what we might suspect of something.
Financial advisors, stockbrokers, that's not what, no, my understanding is.
They are not legally
Not
mandated
legally,
reporters.
but when you do senior suitability studies, we are required.
Right, right. I mean, it's the right thing, it's the good way to do business, all of that, but in that list that the Commonwealth has of who's a mandated reporter, they're not there.
I will just quickly speak for the banks is there's been a lot more awareness now. So although we're not mandated, there's been a lot of focus on whether it's the branch teller or the CSR calling and saying, you know, she's been calling and she called me 5 times today and she asked if this check had cleared. I already told her what her balance was, and I already told her maybe there are some signs that we may be a bit concerned that we may be able to reach out to some resources if there's a family member on the account. Or if there's a safety concern, we've had police officers go out and do a wellness check on customers because we have, maybe not seen this customer for a long time and she comes in every Monday morning. And maybe we just didn't see her, we tried calling her. We'll do stuff like that just because of the general awareness that has been raised over the past couple of years about elder exploitation, so that we do keep that in mind.
And that is one of the benefits of really community banks like Enterprise because they know their customers. And banks have been a great source of information for us in terms of just letting us know there's a suspicion. You have somebody who routinely takes out $50 a week and gets some $100 bills at the holidays to give to their granddaughters, and they all of a sudden are making ridiculously large transactions. If it's a bank that you go to regularly, they're going to notice that. That's not always true with big chains where you might be in all kinds of branches and they have no idea who you are.
Even though attorneys aren't mandatory reporters, I have called Elder Services of Merrimack Valley. They're a great organization, and they've taken reports from me and they've done an investigation, so that's how we handle it.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but you keep saying that you called and they did an investigation. The problem is the elderly person will not proceed. What do we do about that when they're being bullied? In addition, an EMT is a mandatory reporter. In my particular case, the grandchild's son is an EMT. He is the abuser. It gets really complicated.
So you're right, an EMT is an abuser, and actually one of the initiatives we've done, I spoke earlier about the private partners, is we have partnered with the ambulance companies across the county because one of the things we discovered, remember what I said, a lot of people are trapped in their house. But one thing that does tend to happen very often to elderly is they fall. And they often need to call an ambulance at least to come and get them up off the floor. So we have done a lot of work training ambulance companies to be, when they go in that house, they may be the only person in a month that sees that person, to be alert to other signs of financial abuse. One of the issues with seniors, which is different than with the reporting of abuse to children, if you call up and report that you suspect your 5-year-old neighbor is being abused, when the Department of Children and Families comes out, they're going to do that investigation. They are going to investigate, they're going to figure out whether that child is safe. In Massachusetts, elders, if they are competent, they're able to make their own decisions. When the person comes from the Department of Elder Services to their house and says, I'm here to see if you're all right, an elder does have the right to say, I'm perfectly fine, go away, I'm not going to let you in. Now, it's then up to the worker to make an assessment. Is that person really competent? Is there somebody standing behind them, kind of whispering in their ear when they're making that? And then they can take additional steps to see about getting somebody else to go into the house.
Okay, just to complete it, in this particular case, they said that she was an enabler. Well, she's not. She's being bullied to oblivion.
Right.
So there's nothing that can be done.
If Elder Services, usually they would bring a care and protection case. If they do not bring a care and protection case, someone in the family or some connection to this elder has to go to an attorney and they've got to go to court to get a conservatorship.
There's that tension between, we all know people who are not elders, who live in relationships that aren't very good for them. There are lots of 30 and 40-year-olds that are in bullying kind of relationships that aren't good for them. And people have that right to make bad decisions. As long as you are competent, you don't lose that right with age. It's very frustrating in investigating these cases or getting these reports, because sometimes there's a collision between those two.
What advice do you have for an elderly person whose family members may be far away and not able to help them on a day-to-day basis, given the risk that Martha described with the durable power of attorney?
We have that a lot because, unfortunately, in Massachusetts, we have a lot of folks who age in place in their own communities. In Middlesex County, not only is that high across the state, in Middlesex County it's 10% higher than the rest of the state, which is a great thing, because that means people are, aging in the community where they've lived their whole lives. But we are a very mobile society. So we get calls all the time from the daughter in Michigan who is worried about mom who's in Chelmsford. She has a health care provider, she's not really sure. It's a lot of it is really being vigilant about it. It's making good decisions about what you're putting in place. Lots of times people end up using as a caretaker, for instance, just somebody who's the nice neighbor. And you live in Michigan and you're really happy that the neighbor keeps an eye on your mother. You feel like that's a good idea. If the neighbor is bad intentioned, it doesn't take them long to figure out nobody's actually checking the bank accounts. And they very quickly can start abusing that connection that they have. So it's thinking about, you can never be foolproof, but you've got to get somebody from outside, an agency that might be bonded if you lose the money, that sort of thing. It's watching the accounts. Again, people are careful about being the bad guy. We had one woman very careful about her mother's accounts, would review her mother's accounts all the time. Everything seemed to be in order. The checks and the debits seemed to be appropriate. But when you really looked hard, there was $700 a week being either written in checks or debited at the Stop and Shop. The 89-year-old woman was not eating $700 worth of food a week, all right? I mean, even good food. So what the caretaker was doing was going in and getting cash back. Buying a loaf of bread and getting cash back. But at first glance, as we're all busy in the sandwich generation of people who have kids who are trying to take care of their parents. You ran through, it looked like everything was Stop and Shop, the electric company, it all seemed fine. So there is that real sense of having to be vigilant about it. There are lots of professionals now who are out there who will help you. You can hire somebody in the place where your parents are that will sort of oversee and keep that going and looking. People are often horrified when they go and find something like what Martha described. They thought mom was being taken care of. Mom hasn't been out of bed or dressed in a month. So a lot of it is just really, electronics now help. You can put cameras and Skypes and whatever in the house. A lot of those things make this a little bit easier.
Thank you.
You bring up a great issue where a lot of people, I have a case where the nephew is living in Hawaii and his aunt is in a nursing home here. And the only way he is really properly able to he's her guardian and her conservator, she has money. So we've hired a geriatric care manager who checks in on her, and also this extra home health care at the nursing home. But if a child or a power of attorney who's not here is at a distinct disadvantage, and they've got to have trusted people around the elder in the area because they can't be here.
So we have time for 2 more questions, and I believe we have 2 questions from this table here.
Okay, hi. Thank you. I just want to first off say thank you very much. This has been great. I have 2 semi-related questions. The first is just wondering what the district attorney's office has perhaps put in place to educate social workers at various, medical facilities. Typically in what I do for work, these types of issues can arise when there's severe change or it's more of a reactive situation. Someone falls, goes to rehab, they go to assisted living, they go to nursing home, something drastic happens. Has anything been put in place to really educate about those types of financial abuse and make sure social workers are talking to families about these risks? And then the second question was for you, Prima, just more about like what kind of alerts come up if there's a 7-cent charge or a 5-cent charge? Like when should we expect to hear from our bank? Like how are you guys watching that where I would actually hear from you guys about, if I'm not checking it every single day? Thanks.
So to the first question, we really, as I said, our mission is to get the word out as much as possible. So we have a very robust training program, both with elder services, the caseworkers, with the hospitals. I frequently do grand rounds at the hospitals to be educating folks. We bring people into our office for day-long trainings to hear from folks. So we have a very good web, and it helps that I spent 19 years working with a lot of those folks, so a lot of them we've actually got good personal connections with. I would say that we probably train several thousand people a year because there was a lot of turnover in those jobs as well at the agencies or whatever. So we are constantly bringing people in. We go out, I go out and do a lot of brown bag lunches. As I mentioned, we're out all the time at the senior centers, the councils on aging, any place, churches, any place that people think they'll get a group of folks together who need to know about it. Because what I always ask people is, you're able to be here, you have the information, please just take the information and give it to 5 other people, especially people who might not be able to be out and about and get it for that. So we do take that very seriously and partner with people in education.
So as on the banking side, as to when will how to detect a unusual transaction, there are some controls in place that the banks have, but it depends on the type of transaction and how it's coming through. So for example, if it's a debit card transaction, there are softwares in place that might say, well, the customer normally might do a transaction around this area, but if there's a transaction in China, maybe the system will flag it and then you make a notification. But if it's a check, if you're coming in and depositing a check, we wouldn't necessarily be able to say if it's good or bad until it processes through the time that it takes. So that's when the conversation would come. I would say the customer is more empowered with knowing what's in their account and what they authorize or not. So normally we would want our customers to raise a flag and say this transaction doesn't look good, because what we've seen with some of the fraud that's taking place is they're trying to keep a dollar amount small enough where the banks may not necessarily pick up and say this is a very unusual transaction. So they try to keep it under those thresholds where it goes undetected. So reviewing those bank statements and just knowing what's in your account, I think is going to be the key with the customer being able to identify that before the bank does.
Our favorite story that we tell all the time of how we uncovered literally a many $million fraud that was going on began with an elderly gentleman, lots and lots of resources. His household bill accounts were in 6 figures. And he meticulously balanced his checkbook every month, adding in and out everything. And he began seeing discrepancies that were 30 to 40 cents. And he kept going to the bank reporting that. And of course, you know, for somebody with that amount of wealth, and he kept coming in saying there's 30 cents missing from my account, you know, most of us aren't doing that. It costs you more in gas to get to the bank. And he was very persistent. The bank really finally took it seriously, started going through and checking. We discovered somebody was literally had hacked into people's accounts and was literally taking nickels out of people's accounts. So if you think about how you could access a lot of accounts, and somehow they were, every time there was a transaction taking, and somehow managing to divert an extra nickel for those accounts. When we found the account that the bad guy had, well over $1 million in nickels. So it really, I mean, at some level there is sort of the creativity of it, but you know, most people, I'm one of those people who looks at my bank statement and it's kind of close, I'm good with that. 90 cents, 50 cents, I am not going to the bank to do that, but it really is, he saved a lot of people a lot of money by being so persistent about that.
I know we only had time for 2 questions, so I didn't have a question. So I just wanted to offer that the Elder Services of Merrimack Valley does have a mentor program where volunteers help with people paying bills and checking on credit cards and statements and things like that. So it may not be maybe a resource that people might be aware of that they could use to help somebody who may not have, all the help that everyone would like.
Well, I know I said we had time for just 2 more questions. However, Chief Spinney asked to say a few words. And since we're in Chelmsford, and he's the chief, Chief Spinney has the floor.
Thank you very much, Ken. I just want to welcome everybody. Good morning. I want to thank Enterprise Bank and the District Attorney for putting this seminar together. This is a priority for us in Chelmsford, and that's really why I wanted to come up and say a few words. It's not something we don't look at. If you have any concerns about a family member, you don't think something is passing the smell test, call us. We send officers out all the time to check on family members, and we are mandatory reporters, as most of you probably know. And we will initiate an investigation, whether that means contacting the financial institution for a family member, working with the district attorney's office, elder affairs. It is a priority. And unfortunately, every example that the district attorney and others brought up today has happened in this town. Those scams that were brought up have happened right here, from IRS scams to a family member is in need. We've unfortunately had to deal with them all. So I just want to say on behalf of the Chelmsford Police Department, if you think something needs to be addressed, you can certainly start with us, and we'll definitely launch an investigation into it to make sure your loved one is safe. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here this morning. We hope you've enjoyed this event, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.